Awesome. I think we're about to start. Just had to wait a little bit to make sure the stream is actually coming through. Howdy everyone. There's a few peeps here. Some of you guys that that are students of AIE, they'll probably would find they might already know some of the stuff I'm going to be going through. But welcome guys. Awesome. Whoops, I had my voice feeding through the actual stream again. I'll just turn that off. I just had to make sure everything's good and dandy. Everything's fantastic. This is good. And I think at this point, I'm pretty much ready to start. So what will we be doing today? Well, we're going to be looking at the Unity particle editor. So I'll be showing you the overview of the Unity particle editor within inside of Unity 5. And I'll be creating a really simple smoke particle. That will be what I'll be using for showcasing how to use Unity particles and whatnot. But I'll be going through each of the little options that you can select and stuff. But first off, before I leave this page, I should actually also acknowledge whose artwork is on the screen at the moment, and it is Sir Daniel Nees at the moment, and he's one of the recent graduates to AIE, and this is his lightsaber that he rendered out, and it looks very beautiful. And what I'll do now is I'll switch to screen share so you can see my face. Hey! Yeah. And before I even actually move on any further, I'll just do a bit of plug for Mr. Daniel Nees. This is his little Facebook page. So if you're interested in finding out what he's been working on and stuff like that, right there, you know? Cool. Just had to get through that. Awesome. Well, I reckon what we'll do now is we'll move on to introducing you to the Unity particle editor. Basically, if you're new to Unity, or if you're wondering what level of skill you need to be to watch this video and understand what's going on, you need to obviously understand that Unity exists, and of course you can open up the Unity editor and such and stuff like that. You just need basic knowledge. I'm going to be going through a basic level of how to use Unity particles. Once again, I do like this is just like a small snippet example, kind of what happens in the classes and stuff like that. And this is just one small snippet of a large, expansive, amazing program, which is Unity 3D, which allows you to create virtual environments. Now, what I have open actually at the moment is the Viking example that they released when I can't really remember, but it was around the time when Unity 5 came out. They released an example level, and this is what it looks like right here. So if you can access this exact same project, I'm not actually going to be using it for the example of this webinar. I'm just going to be showing you more of a finished example, so it's not just an empty, boring scene that I have that I'm going to be using. But you can download this using just basically the Unity asset store within inside of Unity. And you can download, it's like a gig or two. I can't actually remember how large it was, but it downloaded fairly quickly. But you can actually download and have it go through their PBR examples of the level and whatnot. So yeah, that's exactly what I'm using right there. I'll just put that back. And every so often I'll check the chat, because I can actually see the chat in the stream as well. So I might have a different window open up on my second monitor, but I'll be able to check what you guys are writing as well. So ideally you can ask questions throughout. I'll do my best to answer them. If I miss them, just copy paste it and paste it again when I conclude and when we wrap up things towards the end, and etc. But I think we're good to go. So yeah, this little scene here you can download for free. You just import it into an empty project. I literally just did this right before the stream began. So I was like watching the download bar come down. I'm like, oh, I better get finished before the stream starts. But a good example of what we'll be looking at in particular is what we see right here. It's just a simple torch that's inside this level. If I hit play and walk over to it, so that is a particle system. Now, a particle system is it's emitting sprites, in other words, that makes it seem 3D. So when we walk around the object, or how this particle system is set up, is that the little sprites, the little images, the flames, obviously, and of course the smoke, which is very hard to see, but it's there. We're going to make a very thick smoke in our little example. And of course you can, if you're watching the pre-recording of this and not watching live, you'll be able to skip into the video a little bit and you'll get smack bang right into it. Maybe it'll be in the description below indicating what time that would be. But we're going to be making or understanding how Unity particles work, as I said before, at the basic level. So the knowledge, of course, is understanding how to open up Unity, and I'll show you all the steps after that, so you'll be able to follow through if you need to. But yeah, this particle system's a billboard particle system, and it's just basically just facing towards the camera. Every time the camera rotates, the particle kind of rotates. And we've been doing this for like ages inside of games, all the way back. If you look back into the Nintendo 64 era, like very simple particles there. And then as our computers get powerful and more graphics card torque behind our computer itself, we basically can push the limits or push the boundaries of particles and stuff, like, which is kind of interesting for this generation of hardware, where you can have particles that can now emit shadows onto the ground and surfaces. We couldn't really do that particularly in the Legacy or the Xbox 360 and PS3. Well, we could have done that if there was someone customly set it up, but it was very expensive because, like materials, and of course it's a game in particular, it's running real time. So it's going, and textures are one of the most largest, I guess, culprits to slowing down our computers. It's not necessarily the myth of how many meshes that you have inside of a scene. It's particularly mainly the amount of complex shaders and materials that are running and causing draw calls and whatnot. So a simple, I guess, if we look back in the history with how particles came about, we generally use particles for elements like, I guess, rain, fire, smoke, dust particles, splash particles, that kind of stuff. So when the player runs into the water, it splashes out, stuff like that, and all that kind of stuff like that. But it's also good to note that a particle, or what we see here, is not just one particle. It's generally made up of multiple elements. So if we have water falling off a roof, off a drain pipe, and then falling into the ground and making a puddle and making a mess, that will be made up of multiple particle systems. There'll be the little splash coming off the drainage pipe at the top, and then there'll be the stream of the water. That will be another particle system, and then there'll be the splash on the surface. If there's any other sort of stuff involved with that splash, such as there might be a puddle kind of pushing outwards. I know you can't really see my hands, but pushing outwards, and then another one kind of puffing dust, and then maybe another one with splash. So when we look at how a particle system, and why, I guess what's useful for us is that it's a little bit low heavy on the performance side of things, is that we're not physically simulating a 3D object of mesh kind of moving, which will be kind of awesome, of course, but we have to think about optimization and be careful of crashing the computer, and of course crashing mobile devices, because transparency, which obviously what a particle system would have, transparency is generally one of the most things that tanks mobile devices. So we've got to be real careful with transparency, and we can't go too crazy with it. And there's also the type of render that we're using, if it's forward rendering or deferred rendering, which you can generally select inside of Unity and as well as Unreal 4. And some allow you to have more lights in the scene, and it renders alphas or transparency correctly, which is what our lovely particle system is doing right here. And then of course we have the con side of the other side of the renderer, and sometimes you can have least particles, basically in a way, what I'm trying to say, I think I'm trailing off into the void at this point, is that we just got to optimize our particle systems. They're generally made up of multiple elements. We got to be aware of our surroundings, i.e. the engine and what it's capable of, and of course the platform of where this is going to go to, because if we're just mindlessly going through and making something with 1,000,000 trillion particles or something like that, we probably won't get the best results that we might actually think we would have there. So that was really the only purpose of showing this little Viking village. It has some smoke and atmospheric stuff, but you can download these. They're free. You don't need to have something downloaded from us. You can just access it from the asset store. The only thing that's always a bit difficult with Unity is stopping the play. There we go. And you can access it by going Windows up the top inside of Unity and going down to the asset store and just simply searching Viking Village. If you can't find it there, you can always just, use Google Chrome or Firefox to type it in and go, what is, etc. and so forth. Now, it's also good to acknowledge that there is documentation that follows making particles, just like anything if you're going to learn a game engine such as in Unity or Unreal 4, but we're going to be looking at Unity today. And that is looking at the actual official documentation for the actual program or the application. It doesn't matter if you're a teacher or a student, it's always good to kind of, if you're trying to learn something new, is to be aware that it exists. So if you do get stuck, or if you're trying to do a specific element or try and create something, that you can kind of bit of self-correction and self-research into the matter at hand. So if you just Google Unity documentation, there's also a really handy thing inside of Unity that will help you out as well in this if you don't know where the documentation is. On any object that you generally have inside of Unity, they have this little, now we're looking towards the screen, of course, they have this little book icon above the component inside of Unity. You can click on it and it should, in theory, open up the exact thing. I clicked on the mesh filter and clicked on that, which is a component in Unity. And it's opened up an exact replica of what we have here. And I just remembered I forgot to time myself so I don't talk for too long. All right. Yeah, so we can pop right here. So on the particle system, you can click that book and it'll open directly to the Unity documentation for that. Alrighty, so let's hope everything works correctly. I'm actually going to start from a completely scratch project. Oh, that's an interesting choice of words and how I've arranged them, but basically just a scratch project, completely new. So you can create a new project by going File, New Project. But I've already made one. It's called New Unity Document, and hopefully it opens up. Yeah, all good. I don't want the asset store up here anymore, so I'm going to right click on that and go Close. Now, just so it's the same for you if you've just downloaded Unity, I'm going to change my layout back to, and I'll just make sure the stream's still going, right? Yeah, that's working perfect. I'll just change my layout back to default really briefly. So this is what it generally looks like, except my big ugly face sitting in front of the most important part, which is why I'm going to change the layout. So that means you can see my face as well as have everything that's important in view. So this is the general Unity viewport. In fact, I'm pretty sure I can just do that. Oh, there you go. I'm gone. I magically disappeared. Isn't that great? All right. So yeah, so this is the default layout. I like changing it kind of like what it used to be for Unity like 3 and 2.5. I'm just a bit of a fanboy. I like the kind of the layout. I don't like all the icons and stuff. I like how Unity is very simple, easy interface to get your hands on. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the top right, which is what I was just changing back to the normal. I'm going to change this to tall. Now the benefit of this is it compresses everything and I can kind of push it all the way against the wall here. As well as I've got my viewport, I've got my game view, which I can toggle switch between scene and game, as you can see. And of course I'll put my face back. There we go. Back. So there's nothing really important unless there's only tooltips that appear underneath my face in this stream, but we don't really need to worry about them. But hey, we've got scene and game, and then we've got our hierarchy, which is everything that's in the scene currently. So at the moment we have a main camera and a directional light, because that's if we create a new scene or a new project, this is what's in there. Unless you're using some future version of Unity, but I'm just using Unity 5 at the moment. And then we have the project, and the project is what is representative of what's saved on your computer. So if you make assets, files, all that kind of stuff, you put them in your project, and that's generally translated to your My Documents if you're on a Windows computer, of course. and it's where all your files and stuff you put in there. It's like everything of your game is packaged inside of your project. And then what's in our hierarchy is what's currently in our scene. And we can have multiple scenes, which could be scene 1, forest level, scene 2, city level, etc. or whatnot. And then of course, on the far side, which is, that side, all the way over here to the inspector, we have the information of what we have selected. So when we select the main camera, has a bunch of main camera controls. When we select directional light, it has the main thing. Now, I apologize if you already know this, but once again, this stream is more of getting you up from basic standards of if you don't know how to use particularly Unity, but just it's good to go through a refresher as well. All right, so I already have an example that I can show you that I've already done prior to this, and I think I was using it in class a while ago. Here it is. This is what we're going to create. We're going to create the most simplistic smoke particle. We're not going to create the flame because that will be a separate particle showing the flame kind of growing, but just smoke, because you can achieve this if you have Unity and if you have Photoshop, and that's what we're going to use. So I'm going to basically create from complete scratch. I'm not going to source any textures. I'm just going to make it up along the way. But this is kind of what we're going to be doing. And this is our particle system right here. There was an old legacy particle system that was in Unity, but then they've since I think it was like Unity 4, I can't actually remember now, but they have now moved on to the new particle system, which has everything contained. The old particle system, which you can still kind of discover, it's generally when you go add component, you can find like the old components in here. I always forget where it is, but basically Unity is constructed of components. It's like modular, like Lego pieces. Like I want to make a piece of mesh, I'll add a mesh filter, a mesh renderer, and then the material, and that comes together, and that's what we see on the screen. So the old ways of doing particle systems inside of Unity was you used to have like a mesh exploit and a whole lot, sorry, not a mesh, a particle, like multiple particle components to then create the particle, which was confusing and it was a headache and it was all named random and stuff like that. It was annoying. Now they've just made it as simple as anything, that it's just contained within one component. And we can create our particle system. And I'm just going to delete my smoke particle because you can see it's kind of rotating, spinning. We're going to get it becoming alive so it looks like there's wind and whatnot. But I'm going to delete my particle system right there. And I'm also going to show you as well in this video how to instance your particle system. So once you've created it in your viewport, how to simply either set it up so a programmer can just call it and spawn it in locations. Like I won't be doing the spawning like part, I'll just be doing the art side where we set up a prefab, which if you're not sure what a prefab is, just imagine a prefab as a copy of what you've made and you can kind of put it in your scene. That's what this little blue box actually is here. That's a prefab. So when I drag it in, I can have multiple versions of this multiple copies of this particle system, and I don't have to set it up every single time once again. So yeah, I'll show you how to do that as well. So we'll wrap things up with that. But first off, we got to learn how to do a particle system. Now, hopefully, if you skipped into the video this far, which I've already been talking for a little bit, it's more of the introduction. I'll show you how to create a particle system. So it's the most simple thing ever. We go right up to the top. Remember, we're in an empty scene. And if you go up to game object and click on that, this is all the objects you can create. Now, Unity, every object that you create inside of Unity basically is a game object. It's an empty shell, positional data. That's all it is. So X, Y, Z in like movement and such, which is what we can see like right here as well. In Unreal, it'll be an actor. So if you're coming from Unreal, that's how that works. So when we go game object and create a particle system, it's kind of already set up for us. It has the positional data, it has the particle system component attached to it. It's all ready to go. And if we click on it, this is what our particle system will look like. It looks pretty boring at the moment. It's little fluff particles kind of flying off, but it's firing off. I should also just quickly go over viewport controls. Holding down right click allows us to rotate the camera. This is how I navigate. I hold down right click and WASD, just like a first person shooter. And you can also use the scroll wheel with right click as well. You can also as well use Maya controls like Alt left mouse button to like orbit, Alt right click to zoom in and out, etc. But I kind of, with Unity, I like the WASD. And if you hold down Shift as well, it speeds you up. So if I just hold down right click and press S, I slowly move back. But then if I hold Shift, it's like turbo mode, okay? And you can also press F to focus in on the object you have selected as well. You can also double click, I'm pretty sure, on the object in the hierarchy, because you can see particle systems being added there. Alrighty, so that's pretty good. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to put a simple ground planes, because as you can see, if I kind of navigate and look up, it gets very hard to see what I'm looking at. So I'm just going to go game object, create 3D object, and I'm going to create a cube. I'm going to select the cube. I'm just going to double click on it and rename it to just floor. You don't really have to do this. This is just for my sanity's sake. With floor selected, I'm going to click on, in the inspector, going to click on position and click on the X position, press 0, tab, 0, tab, 0. It's really good to kind of tab your way across rather than clicking manually. It speeds up the workflow. So it's now in center of world. I want to typically work in center of world as well. And I'm just going to hit R on the keyboard with the object selected and scale it, because just like most 3D applications, W is translate, E is rotate, and R is scale. So just make that bigger, and I'm going to just create a new material as well. One other thing I like doing as well with Unity is I go to my project, and I don't like this view that they have in the new one, but you can see this little arrow with 3 little lines next to it. You can click on that and you can go 1 column layout. When you click on that, it just gets rid of all those images and it just shows you a list, and that's kind of old classic Unity style, so I can expand out and have more view in my viewport. I'm just going to go to my material and create a new material. I'm just going to call this like brown or something like that. I don't know. And then I'm going to just change this to brown, just in the inspector. That's good enough. And I'll apply brown to that. Just simply drag, click it onto there. Alrighty, and I'm going to also get my particle system and zero it out in the world. I'm also going to get this directional light because it's in the way, and I'm just going to change it to global and just toss it over to the side. And when I click my camera, I can see what the final game looks like. Like if we go to game mode, you can see that's what my particle system looks like. I'm going to lift my camera up a bit. And I'm just positioning it so I can see this. I'm going to lift my particle system out of the ground. And if I click my main camera, that's what it kind of looks like. I can even pull it back and kind of tilt it up like that. That looks fine, because you can see the preview of it selected. Alrighty, so let's get to playing around and learning how to use the particle system editor. So first off, when you have the particle system editor the particle selected, just up particle, it generally automatically plays and freezes everything else that you don't have selected. So what I like doing is I like going over just what we see in the viewport, because you see when I deselect it, that little thing in the bottom of the viewport, like just next to my face, opposite side of the viewport, disappears when I deselect it. Now this is just the particle effect, so you can simulate it. So if I hit pause, it pauses the particle. If I hit simulate, it simulates. I can hit stop and it just cuts it out completely. And if I hit simulate again, it comes up again. We can change the playback speed. We can also change the playback time. But that's what that's there for. So you can play around with that. Doesn't necessarily mean that it might, like if you play around these settings, that it will follow along with the particle. You just got to be aware of it. It's just what you're previewing currently at the moment. So when we have the particle system selected, we have the particle system component that sits here. And if we just expand this so it just seems more larger as well, and I'll just rotate so you see the particle. All right, so we've got the little component here. Basically what we see here, and this is what is useful about the Unity particle editor, which is when you're editing your particles, is it only has the bare minimum turned on. You can see that you've got the information of how the particle is born, like right here at the top, that's what's expanded. Then we have the emission, then we have the shape, and then we have the renderer. So if we just look at over these, we've got, this is how the particle, well, how it's born. The emission is, oh, actually, in a way, it's just basically just controlling like what is its properties when it gets spawned exactly. Now I'm going to go over each individual one as well and explain and then build our little particle system as well. But I'm just going over just a high level so we can see this. So we've got emission, which controls how many does it emit. So it's emitting 10 like every second or so. We'll just popping them out. That's what it says 10 here. Then it has the shape, and this is the shape of the emitter. And as you can see in the viewport, it is this lovely looking, I'll just probably drag this back in the corner so we just have a bit more room. All right, so this is the shape, and you can actually interact with it in the viewport by clicking on these little tiny boxes, which is really neat. But that's, you can visualize it happening. And then of course, if we scroll the way down, we've got renderer, and render is how it's physically rendered. Like, what is it doing? Well, at the moment, we've just, like, as I described before, it's emitting sprites, and the sprites are always facing towards the camera, which we can actually see here under renderer. It's called billboard, and that's what we generally refer to them in the games industry. So this is how it's rendered, and this is how we change our texture and material and all that kind of shenanigans. Okay, so when we if we wanted to make our own smoke particle in particular, we'll need to change this material right here. But just before we move any further, you can close them. You can see there's all these other ones in here, and they're all disabled. Now, they don't work unless you turn them on. Like, you actually tick the box, and then you can actually start playing around with them. I don't want to turn that on just right yet, but what I'm going to show you is something a little bit easier rather than seeing it all crammed up to the side. Is I like going up to the editor up the top here. So on the top of the component, and once again, there's that little book there you can click, and it'll open up the information about particle systems as well. So if you ever get stuck or you want a refresher, or you can't find this video, even though it's archived on YouTube afterwards, you can always click on that as well. But if we go to the open editor right here, we click on that, it opens it up in its own little window that we see here, which is really handy. So we can, what we basically see here is this is the same stuff we saw just before, just listed here. Then we can add new particle systems that are parented to that object. So think of, it doesn't matter. Basically, you can create a new particle system here. I just tried to explain something, and then I was like, stop, no effort, we'll just keep going. And then, of course, what we see here in that little gridded area, that's where we visualize our curves, our animation curves. And then at the top here, we've got previewing, basically, elements where we can preview our particles and such. I'll just have a quick look. No one has actually asked any questions yet, which they're probably all attentively listening, but I'll just check every so often just to make sure. All right, so that's what we have so far. Well, let's go make our particle at the moment. So at the moment, our particle dot that we see in the background over here, it's just a round dot with transparency around the edge and stuff like that. Now we're gonna make our own one. So let's open up Photoshop. I already have Photoshop opened. Isn't that magical? And I'm gonna make a new texture, and I'm gonna change the pixels in, like, so I've just gone File, New, and I'm going to the width and height, and I'm gonna change this to pixels. And I'm gonna actually make a pretty large sprite. Generally, if you look at the Unity default ones and stuff, the sprites are really small. They're like around like icon size, like really tiny images, because you don't want to have large images that go, because that's getting loaded into memory and loaded real time, and it chugs it down. But I'm going to be a bit generous, and I'm going to make it 256. Like, that's probably like a generous size for a particle. So it's always a power of 2 number. So obviously, if you double 256, you get 512, and then it goes on and so forth. Some people use like 128, I think. Yeah, it's the one below that. Just always divide this number by 2 or times it by 2, and you'll get that kind of the correct range of predictable numbers that your computer understands. So if I go 256 by 256, I open that up. I've created myself an empty canvas. And what I'm going to do is, on this little texture that we see here, I'm going to generate some clouds. Now you can do this in any version of Photoshop, pretty much since CS2. It's been there forever. So I'm going to go Filter, Render, and go Clouds. Now before I click that, I also should note that the 2 colors, like just right above my I'm probably actually blocking it. Sorry, I should get rid of my webcam. Get out of here, webcam. There we go, so you can see Photoshop a little bit better. So these two colors that we see down here, that's going to depict what colors get generated by the clouds. So if I go filter, render, clouds, it'll make it between colors of black and white. That's what we see right here. And if every time I go filter and I can hit Control F, which does the last tool that you've done, you see every time I click it, it randomizes and gives you a new result that we have here. Now, we're going to use this as our basis for our particle system, or our smoke particle that you saw prior earlier in the stream. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to click on the little box here, and I'm just going to not make it completely black, because digital black, like 100% black, never really looks good. I'm just going to kind of drag it up a little bit so it's just a slight gray, like dark black gray. And I'm going to go to the white, and I'm going to probably put it around a bit of grayish. I'm not going to go anywhere near this color, because obviously you'll make a colorful particle. We want to basically have our particle white, black and white, because in Unity we can change the color if we really need to. Rather than putting color in here, it's probably not the best idea. So I'm just gonna put it around gray rather than just white. And then if I hit filter clouds, you'll see it's not the colors, the spectrum where it's generating the clouds and stuff is not like there's no elements of 100% white, there's no elements of 100% black. So if we just go, I'm just gonna filter it again to get something kind of like, all right, that looks cool. Excuse me. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to create an alpha channel for it. So at the moment, if we put this into Unity, it'll be emitting squares of clouds, which isn't really good. We're going to make an alpha channel or a mask to mask out all our, like a space around our particle that we have here. So what I'm going to do is inside of Photoshop, instead of on the layers where we have all our layers, I'm going to go to channels. And you can see this RGB, which is red, green, and blue, which is the colors that we have in the image, but it's not much really red, green, or blue here at all. And I'm going to add a new layer down at the bottom by clicking on the little folded piece of paper icon, and it creates us a new alpha. Now, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go to my paintbrush over in Photoshop, and I'm going to I can right-click either on the canvas, and it gives you your brushes, like a quick editor to get to the brush. I'm going to click on this little kind of snowflaked fall-off dot. It's very similar to the one that we just have emitting in Unity at the moment, but I want to have the hardness set to 0, and you can play around with the size. It really doesn't matter. And you can click on the canvas after that once you've selected. You can also change the brush up here as well with the brush selected. So I generally use the staple keys on my keyboard. They're generally just below the backspace key on your keyboard, the little harsh staple keys. And I make it larger or smaller. I don't really like, but you can change it here if you want, but I may visually make it larger and stuff. And you can start clicking and stuff like that. But what I want to do is I want to change my opacity down a bit, because at the moment I'm just pasting once again like an intense, I'm just going to change it to gray actually. And on the second color, I'm pasting a gray sort of color over the top. Now I'm going to hit Control-Alt-Z and undo all the changes I've done in my little alpha thing here. I'm going to change my opacity down a bit, maybe like 60% or something, we'll see. And I'll just once click there. And then I can probably change it a little bit lower, maybe change the size of my brush, and I'll just paint a little bit. You can always switch it by hitting X on the keyboard, or hitting this little arrow to switch between black and paint in black again with like a low transparency, as we can see here. Now I'm just making an interesting shape, but one thing that I don't want to happen is I don't want to draw all the way across and then I hit the sides of my canvas here, because then when it's emitting the particle, you'll see a seam down the particle itself. So I'm going to make sure that there's none kind of here, but I'm just going to make an interesting blob. Like I just made that up. I didn't really have a pre-made blob, but I just want to play around with the color itself here. So I've put a white dot and then I've kind of erased backwards, because how an alpha channel works is black and white. Black is invisible, white is visible. So at the moment this particle is gray, so it's slightly transparent, And in the wider areas, like you can play around with it. It doesn't, just for the test, you can like add stuff in, a little dot like that. I've done that, I don't have to worry about it, but I'm done now at this point. So, and what I normally like doing is turning back on RGB and turning off the alpha. But you see, I'm basically masking out using this alpha, like this black and white image, to kind of grab the texture from behind and stuff. So at this point, I'm done. Now just once again, make sure that there's no white touching the edges. So generally I go around and like hit it with black and stuff and kind of erase around to make sure it's a floating blob. But I'm just gonna go File, Save As, and I'm gonna save it off as a TGA or Targa, T-A-R-G-A or TGA. And I'm just gonna I should put it in my my Unity folder, but I'm just going to save it directly to my desktop because it's just a little bit easier. And I'm going to call it txt for texture underscore smoke. There you go. So it's always and I'm going to make sure as well that when I hit save using the TGA or Targa, that I'm going to save it off as 32-bit. Because if it's 32-bit, basically it contains an alpha channel. If I save it off as 24-bit, it will delete my alpha channel that I created, which is generally where we hide transparency and other additional masks in our textures if we wanted to. So I hit OK, and it's all good and dandy. Now I go back to Unity, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close my particle editor, and as you see when I close, it goes back here. I'm going to go to, I've made folders already, but I highly recommend to always be organized with what you're making. So right click, create folder, and call it like textures or materials or meshes. Always organize your work. Don't just dump it in there and hope that it works afterwards. I've already got a folder called textures, but that's how you create it. Right click, create folder, texture. But I can open up my texture folder, and you can see this is the example, the one that I had before that I showed you. It's just sitting in my project at the moment. You won't have that there. So if I right click on my folder and then go import new asset, we can see, go to my desktop, go to my text smoke, import it there, and there it is. It's now imported, and you can see it's already got an alpha channel, so we want to make sure alpha from grayscale is turned off. We don't want to have that. Alpha is transparency. You can turn that on if you really want, doesn't really matter, but yeah. So we've got that there. Now we need to create a material for it. So I'm going to go to my materials folder, which I've already created. Once again, create a materials folder if you need to organize the stuff. Go right click, create, and then we're going to go material. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to call this material, because instantly I created it, asked me for a name. I'm going to call this material just MAT for matte material, whatever. You can have your own naming convention here. And I'm going to call it smoke. Oops, I think I hit Control S by accident. Smoke. Alrighty, now we're here. Now this is the shader up to here. On the shader, I'm going to go all the way up to the top where it says standard. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to go all the way down to sprites, because particles, not sprites. We want to use Unity's sprites, like particle materials, rather than the standard. You can use the standard if you want, it'll work, but it's basically you want to use the one that's built for particles. For the circumstances, that's what I'm going to be choosing to use. And I'm going to pick alpha blended. All these different options is how it detects like how the blend of the particle works. But we're going to check alpha blended. And then we're going to open up our little textures folder. I'm going to drag in txt smoke. I'm going to click and hold drag and drag it into there. And we've got our particle system kind of looking nice. Like if we look down here, you rotate it, that's what it kind of looks like. Our little alpha doesn't look too shabby. And this material is what we then apply to the particle system. Now there's two ways of doing it. You can just simply drag it to the particle system, or you can open the particle system and go down to the renderer tab and click on the little section where it says material. I'm just going to drag it directly to the particle system right there. And you see it changes. You can see I could even apply it to the floor, but you don't want to do that. All right, so there's my particle system right there. It's pretty faint actually, but that's okay. It's now emitting our little smoke bits. Now, if we didn't add an alpha channel, or if the alpha isn't working, or you haven't set up your transparency correctly, and what I mean by that is that your material isn't set to particles alpha blended. If it doesn't look right, you can always try different ones. Like if you go particles and we'll change it to additive soft, see it's giving me a different result. And if I change it to particles and we try like multiply, it's kind of like a darker version. So you can play around with it as much as you want. Like maybe even additive soft, it kind of looks kind of nice. Just click the particle. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it on that. See, it's fine. And of course, with your particle, when you have it selected, you can play around like how soft the particles are as well. That's what this little option is here. You can play around the particle soft factor of how they spawn and stuff like that. Alrighty, so we've got our smoke emitting. At the moment, it's not acting like smoke, obviously. Smoke kind of waffles off to the side. So inside of my particle editor, I'm going to go down the options. And it was a pretty lengthy introduction, definitely. But it looks like it's going to probably be a lengthy sort of webinar. Apologize in advance, but hey, that's what happens. And I'll just check if anyone's posting stuff. Dust bunnies. Yeah, someone's writing that. All right, so if I look at my particle system right here now, I've got duration. So how long does it go for? At the moment, it's going for 5 seconds and it stops. So I'm going to probably change it to like 3. Now, these values I'm entering for my particle sim, why is it not working now? What did I do? I just broke my particle system. Stop, simulate. Okay, that's weird. I don't know what was doing. Oh, that's right. I know why. I'll tell you why. So it's like, so at the moment, its duration, it's going for 5 seconds. Now, right below it, it says looping or not. Now, if I have looping turned on, it'll just constantly loop and emit particles. So for particle systems that only happen once, like for what maybe like what a programmer might want to call or something like that, like such as like a dust particle near the foot when the foot impacts the ground, that will probably be called once, because you only want to call it when the foot moves. You don't want it just to keep emitting smoke from his feet or something like that. For something like rain, maybe you would want that, you'll definitely want that to loop. For something like fire and smoke, you would want that to loop. But for items like impact hits, like if a gun's shooting a wall and it's got little defragments, which are obviously particles, that would probably, you would want that to only be set to play once, which looping turned off. Pre-warm is what we see here is if the particle system's already warmed up and playing in full force. A good example is this, there was a recent GIF image of Far Cry Primal that was released a while back, and it has someone climbing up a cliff, and then they look over the cliff, and then you see the waterfall in the distance just beginning to emit the particle sim, kind of just start emitting the waterfall or whatnot, which is just a texture, like just like how we create the smoke one. And to avoid that for them, of course, is they would have some sort of pre-warming turned on. But of course, AAA projects like that, you would have to be aware of that they're severely trying to optimize their work. And if you have a particle simulation that's always playing in your level, that's off screen, and there's no culling involved, like it doesn't automatically cull that or despawn that particle sim, you'll basically, it'll chug into the memory and stuff like that. So pre-warm that we see here is so that if I hit, like for example, if I turn off pre-warm and hit stop and hit simulate, you see it begins to simulate. If I hit stop and then go pre-warm and hit simulate, see how it's instantly full-fledged force, as if you've walked into the area and it's already been going. So obviously for stuff like a fire or like smoke that's kind of already been there, you don't want to like load in the level and then suddenly see it all beginning to start smoking. That's what, if they've forgotten to click pre-warm, you would want it to be already going. So as if you've walked across an area and the smoke's already kind of pillowing up into the sky and whatnot. So you can leave some, it doesn't really matter for us. I'll leave it on pre-warm. But if you have it turned off, you can have a start delay. So when the level spawns and the particle spawns, you can then change it so that it can delay a few seconds before it starts. So if you have multiple particles, maybe you can have one particle system fire off and then you wait a few seconds and then the next one fires off, and etc. That's what that would be used for. And then we have down here start lifetime. So this is the lifetime for the particle. So we have the duration of how long the particle overall goes for, but this is the life of each little particle floating off into the distance right here where we see start lifetime. So at the moment it lasts for 5 seconds. That's incredibly long. I'm going to change it to about like 3. I might change it later on in the webinar. Just be aware that like when you're making a particle system, there's no golden number or golden like what you have to do in order to get an awesome particle or something like that. It's generally just looking at it and going, does it look good or does it look bad, and then fixing it from there. So what I'm writing down here doesn't mean that you have to exactly replicate what I'm doing, because it might not work for what your particle works for. So I'm going to set it to 3. That doesn't seem too shabby. And then it has start speed, it's set to 5 something, blah, blah, blah. Smoke doesn't fly off in the distance unless so we want to probably slow down the speed. So I'll just change it to what I feel that it looks all right. So look at start speed, set to 1, it's all right. Maybe like 1.5. It's not too bad. I can always change if I don't like it later on. And then it has start size. Now this is the one, this is a good point to bring up with particle sims as well, is that you don't want to go too crazy with them. You don't want to have like 500,000 particles firing out to make like this big volumetric cloud of stuff. You want to limit the size of the particles and use less particles, of course, because the more of them, especially with mobiles as well. So you want to get your size right. So the start size, I can make it like, if I change it to like 3, you can see I've got like more. It looks actually, to be honest, this looks like steam. So we've actually failed our particles, but we can always change it later. Don't worry about that. But I'll change it to like 3. But you don't want to have it like set to 1. And then if I skip down a few, you see max particles or emission, and then under emission like 600 particles. It's like, it's too much. You can also visualize your particle sim, by the way, by going down to the bottom of your particle system editor and turning on wireframe. And then you can visually see all the little sprites that are getting rendered on the screen, which is very handy to see actually what's going on. Like, are they rotating or they're not rotating? Now, if you don't see that wireframe button, it's because you have the editor opened and the wireframe button's in the top right here. I'm just probably going to not use the editor because I need screen space, obviously. So yeah, that's how you turn that on. So if I go back all the way up to the top, we've got start size, we've got set to 1. What I was trying to say is don't emit like 10,000 particles like we see here and then be like, yeah, there's my smokestack. It's performance-wise, it's absolutely terrible. Don't do that. Just always optimize and pull back. Work to the lowest denominator first and get that looking nice before adding more stuff in. Like, more doesn't necessarily mean that it's better, okay? So, and the reason why it's doing big puffs and it's only doing like whatever is because right here it says max particles, 1,000. So it can only show 1,000 particles on the screen at one given moment. So if I change this to like 700,000, now it's just like, this is like what you see in most, I guess, amateur sort of games where they're like, yeah, particle system. And you can see it, I'm pretty much making like coloring in my screen with the amount of mesh that we have here, which is bad. Don't do that. It's bad. So we're gonna revert back to everything back to 1,000. I'm going to change it back to 10 because we'll get to there and change it to what we need it to be. But yeah, it's just something to be a note of. All right, so we got start size. So generally, you want to get the size right. So if I set it to size 5, it looks pretty much exactly the same, in fact, better. And it's using a hell of a lot less particles than what you would have been using with like little tiny things, like a million of them. That's just ridiculous. That's just crazy man talk. You just losing the plot. So play around, find a size for yourself for the start size for this. So we can go like, I want it to be like 4. I don't know, 4 looks good to me. Then we have start rotation. So basically when it spawns, does it spawn at a rotation randomly? Now this isn't rotation over time, because as you see further down in our little particle editor, you'll see those that we're gonna go over. So it doesn't really matter, I'm gonna leave it as 0, it's fine. Then we have start color. And this is what I meant by don't put any color into your texture inside of Photoshop. Put it in Unity, because then I can change the color. Like as you see, I can darken it and stuff. I can also change the opacity, make it fainter or less fainter. We've kind of got some cool steam going on. If this particle doesn't really work particularly well, I won't change it. I'll just get my other particle, my texture that I made before, and just use that, because it takes a bit of fiddle to get it looking right. But yeah, when we hit start color, we can change the opacity, and we can also change the color. So you can make it a rainbowy particle. You can even animate any of these values that you see here using the Unity animation editor as well. Cool. So, will you do this in Unreal too? Well, that's a good question. Someone just asked in the chat, are you going to do this in Unreal? I can't really answer that because I guess I'm not sure, but it'll be a fun thing to do. There might be someone else that might do it, but if it's requested, then we could possibly do it. They're definitely different between Unreal and Unity. But yes, we might do. We probably would, most likely. Yeah, but keep asking questions and stuff like that. Apologies if you're watching this recording and you're like, I want you to just finish the particle simulation, how to make smoke. This thing is wrong. But remember, this is the reason why it's called Introduction to the Unity Particle Editor, you know? Because if I said make smoke material, then everyone expected smoke material like flat out straight. And this is more introducing you to the editor, so then you can understand how to make anything that comes to your mind. In other words, like a magic spell, fire, whatever. Yeah, you can go from there. But yeah, so if we have a look here, we can change the color and stuff like that. And I'm actually going to go back a little bit and show you another cool feature part of Unity, but I'll just go through here. So then we've got gravity modifier. So how much gravity does this particle have? Well, at the moment, smoke doesn't just waffle off into the distance and there it goes. Well, it can sometimes, but there is some sort of gravity going on. So we can go 0.01 and it's kind of pushing down, or we can make it 0.1 and you can see now it's like some cool steam vent kind of puffling out. But I'm going to set it to 0.02 or something like that. So it's kind of fading up, but it's slowly falling down. So adding gravity means the particle emits. It doesn't just infinitely go off in space. It kind of emits and then has some sort of volume, which technically in life it does. There's dust particles. It does flop down a little bit. And then we have inherent velocity. Now this one's actually this one's fun. So if we had a particle sim on someone's, I'm just coming up with something like smoke. Let's say someone's firing a gun and the gun has like some steam come off. It's like fully maxed out and there's the steam or something like that. Now inherent velocity is that, so if the player, like if it's on the first person player and they've got the gun in their perspective like this, sorry, should go like that. And if they suddenly move like this, you would want the velocity of that movement to kind of follow across towards the particles as well. So when the particle system moves left and right and such, the particle system kind of inherits a bit of that velocity. So it's not like this weird kind of CG kind of thing moving along with the gun or something like that or whatnot. So if I go inherent velocity and set it to 1, for example, you'll see that when I move the particle sim, nothing absolutely happens. And you're like, Finn, you're lying to me. Like, why is it not doing that? Well, one little step further down and you would be fine. You've got simulation space. At the moment, it's simulating in local space. So I can rotate it and everything, the whole thing will act like a container, in other words. That's what local space, in a very simple mains term, will explain that, in other words. So if we change this to worlds, it's going to act differently. It's going to react with the world now. It's not in local space. So if I now move this, you'll see, if I just move out, when I move it, you see it kind of flops off that way. It inherits the velocity and such. It inherits one velocity bit. But the problem with this, the problem definitely with this, is that if the player like does this and moves around with the gun, you have like this particle like going 88 miles per hour into the next dimension, flying off the screen and stuff like that. So we actually want to limit this. And once again, there's another option further down that we can actually make sure it limits and it doesn't go high above a certain value. Because with smoke, it's not going to just catapult in the direction. It's going to kind of like woofle and kind of float around and then disappear or whatnot, you know. So I'll just set this to 0.1 for the meantime. So when I move it, it inherits a bit of its velocity, but it's not going crazy. But still, if I move my mouse really fast, it does fly away quite fast. So we want to be aware of that. So we'll fix that later on down the track. But for the meantime, that's fine. We can just leave it there. And then we've got play on awake. Obviously, that means when the particle is spawned, it will instantly start playing. So you can have that turned off. That means when we stop and simulate, also when we hit play and stuff, it will then straight away play. When you're working with programmers or whatnot, you might have that turned off, and then they turn that on with the code to say, oh, now you can play, or something like that. They don't want it to play instantly or something like that. So that's why that option's there. So we'll just leave that on. Now, we've already looked at max particles. That's how many max particles are on the screen. I'm going to leave it at 1,000. That's okay. Then we have emission. We go further down, and we have here the rate that we see here. So this is the rate of particles. Oh, actually, before I do that, I should actually show you something really astronomically amazing with the Unity editor, which I nearly forgot, but I would get to it, definitely. Now, if you might have noticed, there's these little drop-down arrows right next to our options here. And if you click on them, you'll see a constant, which is a number, and a curve, and then a random between two constants, and a random between two curves. So we can even go in further depth and actually get more randomization of the numbers. So we're not just stuck with one number. So in theory, start size, let's do an example of that one, because that one sounds good. Because you see it's all one size and it looks like steam. Yeah, we're going to click on that and we're going to go a random between two constants. And what that does is it gives us two numbers. So we get a random number between 3 and 4. So when the particle spawns, it'll randomize between 3 and 4. So it'll be 3.1, 3.2, and it'll just randomize and spit them out. If I obviously make that lower, you're going to get a lot more smaller particles and stuff and larger ones as well. So you want to have this kind of close to each other. So 3 and 4 is good. But we can also do a bit more inception that we have here. And we can click on this and go a random between two, or we can do a random between a curve. Now, what is a curve? You can see down right at the bottom of the particle editor, there's a curve right here, and it's just 1 or 4, just straight across. I can open up the editor and it'll be a bit more easy to visualize. But this little curve, when we click on start size, this is my curve here. And as you see, when I change, actually I'll just move that to the side. As I change the size of this, you can see it changing the curve. But you see, I can make it start really, it's a random number that could start really like nothing, and then it'll end up big. And I can right click in here and add a key and play around with my sizes. But if I wanted it to start small and get larger, this isn't the one that we fiddle around with. This is just the initial, what it's spawned as. So I'm actually going to change it back to just a random between two constants, and I have it 3 and 4. That's fine. Oh, and once again, a random between two curves is like inception level of awesomeness, that you can have a curve and another curve and it'll do a random between that curve, which is just so cool. Yeah, so we're going to close that, go back down there. All right, so back down to emission. So all of those where you see little arrows, you can do an additional stuff in there to make it look cooler. So that's something to be aware of as well. Cool. So when we have a look at the emission, and this is definitely going to be a long 2-hour webinar. There's so much stuff to go through. Under the emission, we got here, we've got the rate, and we can change the rate. We also have bursts. So think of like a water fountain, quite possibly. Or think of, I don't know, anything else like that. So we can go bursts, and we can add a little plus symbol here. And every 1 second, we have a burst of 700 particles, for example. So it'll go boom and sit them out. So you can have you can customize the amount of bursts. So it's not just a constant stream. It can kind of slowly fluff out more and more and more and so forth. I'm not going to have this. I'm going to minus that off, but that's how that works. And you can base it on time or distance as well. I'm just going to leave it on 10. That's fine. Or I might even change it down to like something that's less, 6. I don't need to have 10. That's the thing. I can just get away with this, and that's my smoke looking kind of all right. Now the shape. Now the shape is the cone, or it's the influence of what the object looks like. Basically, it's the shape of how it emits the particle sim. So at the moment, right at the top, we've got cone, and look at the options we have. There's so many. There's like sphere, so we can emit like a circular or something like that. We can emit like a hemisphere. That will probably be more like for like a steam, like a grating. Like in New York, I see the sewers kind of smoking or something. That might work a little bit better for that. We've got cone, which is what we had before. And we've got like box, so it emits from a box. And then we've got mesh, this is where it gets crazy. So let's imagine an effect in a game, like a ghost or something. We've got a humanoid or a character, and we want to have like him get vaporized or him to wisp away into particles and fall to pieces or something like that. Well, we can actually emit our particles off physical mesh, like off the mesh of the bone here. And we can choose how it emits, and I'll do an example of a piece of mesh. I'll just use one of the sample pieces here, but you can load in any of your custom meshes that you've made in Maya and import that in and basically use that if you wanted to. But I'll just go back to, let's say, hemisphere or a cone or something like that, because that has a bit more settings. So we can physically edit it in the viewport like that, and you see it's changing how my smoke works. Like I can make it more misty, or I can just kind of funnel it like it comes from a certain point. So I have my cone open and then funnel it in so it's all coming from the single point. We can change the size by clicking on these points and changing how it emits, etc. And of course we have like options to even oops, I didn't mean to shut that. We also have emit from, and this is kind of cool as well. So you got so much options you can do with particles. Like you can get lost of particles, as every developer knows. You can spend like a day making particles with the amount of stuff you can play around, making that perfect particle that will have a little bit of amount. Is there a way to make particles follow a curve, like when you open a freezer and frost comes to the ground? That's a good question. You could probably do it with a piece of mesh in a way. Like you can have a piece of invisible mesh of like a piece of like a plane, like a 3D plane kind of coming out and then doing this, right? And then just as what I'm showing here, we have emit from, you can emit from certain areas, and you could use that burst as a bit of help. So it'll burst and flow down and go around. I know you can't, I should be looking at, so it'll be burst and go like across. That could work. Otherwise you'll just animate it. You'll just physically grab the particle system and you'll animate it, its position, and that will kind of do the same effect. Otherwise you'll have multiple particle systems. So I'm answering your question in 3 different ways. So I should actually, I think I did read it out. It says, and then it just follows the mesh. Yeah, that could work, but possibly what you would probably do is you'll have a particle system for the burst when you open up the cooler, another separate particle that will show it falling down, and then another one coming out. So you can do it multiple ways. I think that's probably the easiest way, just having 3 different particles and they're just doing the different things. That will break it down to a lot more simpler fashion, and that would make more sense than my stupid way of the mesh, because mesh is cool, but it's like, do you really need it like that? You'll just break it into components. Like with particles, like fire, you think, what are the elements that make up a piece of fire? Well, you got fire, like the actual flames, you've got smoke, and you've got sparks and embers. So those are all different particle systems sitting on the same thing, doing their thing, and you get the final result. So that's what I'm trying to mean from that. So with an esky opening up and then the steam kind of pouring out, you might have multiple particles, or you can do some tricky stuff. But you experiment. So if I was tasked to do something like that, I'll experiment and see what works best. But I'll probably end up with the one with multiple, because that would be easier. Yeah, there we go. We got people putting in different ideas and whatnot. Yeah, cool. All right, so back to the main shenanigans. So we can emit from the base. So what that does is it'll emit from the base of this shell right here, oh sorry, base shell. Now it is, sorry. It was emitting from the base, but now it's physically emitting from the point on the space of the, I keep forgetting where the camera is, point here, and it's emitting from there. Before it was kind of just in the general base area and it was emitting up. We can also emit from the volume. So what does volume mean? Well, think of like, think this cone as a box. It's the inside of that box that it's emitting from. So it's the volume of the box, the innards of it. So it's randomly emitting from points in this circumference of this cone that we see here, which you might want. But for fire in particular, we might just want it coming from one point. So yeah, it's up to you. You can probably have a little box or something, have it sit on the fire, and then it's emitting around randomly. So it gives a bit more of a random effect kind of thing. And then we can also emit it from the volume shell. So think of, you see those, it's the best way to describe it as these, visually what you see here with the splines that make up the thing I can edit, it's emitting on the shell of that. So it's not emitting in the center, it's not emitting from the base, it's emitting along the shell, the outer shell of it. So you have so much customizability with playing around with your particles that we have here as well. And you can also tick random direction and it just fires it off random directions, but we don't want that. We want it to go up that normal way. Now, before I go any further, I'll just show you just briefly like mesh. Like, how does mesh work? At the moment, there's no mesh loaded in. I can load in a piece of mesh, and these are the default mesh pieces that Unity has. But you can load in anything that you could possibly think of for this part here. You don't need to have some other sort of scenario that we have here. We can emit from like a capsule, for example. And as you can see, you might be like, oh, well, I've got a mesh there. And this is what I was meaning with the kind of the smoke whiffling out of like an esky or something like that. Is I can then say I want it to emit from the vertices. Or sorry, correction, a vertex. Vertices is multiple. I'm not meaning that. Vertex, which is these little points where the points of the edges where they connect and stuff like that. Then we've got edges. And then we've got triangles, so we can emit from the faces, in other words, that's triangles. So you see how it's all triangulated? So I can go emit from a triangle, so now it's emitting from triangles. Now it's emitting from the edges. Now it's emitting from, vertexes. The vertex of random vertexes on vertices on this model. Now, if you really want to visualize it actually happening, because it's a bit hard to see, is if we change, and I'm going to, as I said, I'm going to be subject to doing this. If we change the start size to like 1, for example, and we change the start speed to 0, and we turn off gravity, you can kind of get a bit of more of an idea. And if I scale this up, you can see it's spawning on the faces and edges of this mesh, right? So I just have them animating outwards, so it's a bit hard to see, but you can actually see it working. So in theory, we could have like a human, and we can have like, I don't know, like a jump scare or something silly like that. And there's a monster that comes out of the closet, and it's got like, I don't know, made up of like wispy sort of glowing particles or whatnot. And you can just have it there, and then just kind of like animate the thing flying off, and it'll kind of like resemble the shape and then kind of like fade or disappear, whatever you want to do. It's completely up to you with how you want to attempt it in that way. I'm just going to hit Control Z a few times because I don't really want all those changes I just did. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to set it to a cone for my smoke particle. Just going to drag it down. And I'm just going to change the base of the shell. That's where I want it to emit from. That's fine. And yeah, that's all right. So that's shape. That's just going into with shape. Then we have velocity over lifetime. So if we have this turned on, it means, does it gain speed over the lifetime of its existence, in other words? And so when it spawns, does it get faster? Does it get slower? So remember, particles are not just smoke, all that kind of stuff. We can use them for stars. We can use them for like laser weapons or something shooting off, and we can change how they react. So when it spawns, it doesn't just waffle off into the distance. It kind of goes pew, whoop, or something. It can go really fast. It can slow down and speed up. I'm not going to turn this on because I don't need it, but that's the explanation for that. So it controls the velocity of each particle during its lifetime. Then we have emit velocity over lifetime. So as you can see here, it says controls the velocity, it controls the velocity limit over the lifetime, dampening the particle. So that problem that I had before, that if I had like the smoke on the gun and when it whips like that fast, we don't have a particle going like flying off 88 miles per hour, we can actually turn this one on and we can go, well, I want to limit this, I believe, in world space and dampen it. Yeah, it's good. I might want to, I can change that later, but we can actually have that one there as well. I think that's right. Yeah. So if it looks a bit funny, we can always go back there and change, but we can limit it if we really wanted to. Yeah. And I don't really need the separate axis turned on. That's if you want to limit it in certain directions and stuff like that. But once it's limiting at 1 at this point. If I put like 0, you'll see it's not moving anymore and it's boring. So if I go 1, that means every time I move it, like if we just go to the movement thing and we chuck it, check that out. If I toss it left and right now, it's not flying a million miles an hour. Because remember that previous one, which is inherit velocity, which is 0.1, if it was going really fast, it'll inherit the additional velocity of that, and then it'll go even faster past that. So if we just turn on limit, it stops that particle freaking out and flying like a kilometer away, which will happen because it's game development and stuff like that. Then we have force over lifetime. So I'll just read the little tooltip because this actually helps as well. Controls the force of each particle during its lifetime. So if we were using particles to activate something called like detect, let's say like hit detection or whatnot like that, we can control the force of the particle. So when it hits something, it bounces off afterwards or something like that, or it that's what we have here. We're not going to really have this on for a smoke particle, but that's kind of what that is going there. So it's like the force, like what's the control of the force that it has over its entire lifetime. So I'm going to leave that off there. Now this one we do want to change, which is color over lifetime, because at the moment we've got pretty all right. Oh, actually we might change force over lifetime because we can use it to fake wind in a way. So we can turn that on. We can go, let's just say in the Z, I want to move it 1 in the Z if it allows me, and I'll change it to world. There we go. Because we're working in worlds. Remember, you can't have local and world if it clashes. So you can see if we play around with force over lifetime, it's kind of like wind in other words. So this is fake wind through the particle sim. We can actually use wind zones inside of Unity to actually control the particle singularity flying around in the view. But yeah, so we're going to set that to like 1 in the Z. We can set it to 5 if we want. Remember, it's always going to be limited to a certain distance. So look there, it's pretty windy now. It's kind of off to the side. But also remember, our limit velocity over lifetime is also taking effect at this point. But yeah, we can go in there and change it. So I'm going to leave that on. So that looks okay. So it's kind of waffling off to the side. Let's go to color over lifetime. Now, at the moment, color over lifetime is a sad cookie. It's just one single color or one gradient. Remember, you can click the little drop down and go random between 2 gradients. So you can have random colors between 2 gradient colors, which is so cool, but I'm just going to leave it on a gradient. If I click on the white box, this will pop up, and this is our control of how we control what it looks like. So I would say at this point, we should probably look at reference. So if we just go smoke or something, hopefully it doesn't come up with horrible images. Well, if we're just getting just generic smoke, this is what we have, so it kind of looks all right. But then we go like fire, smoke. There you go. So you got something a little bit different. It's more black and putrid and stuff. I'm going to probably go something around here. That looks all right. But always look at reference. Don't just make it up in your head. But we can see that it is a funnel coming out and it's getting more putrid and black, but it dissipates a little bit. But yeah, so whatever smoke that you're going to pursue or what you're going to do, just look at reference, see what it looks like there. So there's a good one. See, it's starting very putrid black, and then it's ending out a bit more faded out from what we have here. So let's somewhat replicate that, okay? Now, my smoke particle is not as awesome as what we saw of that big volumetric cloud of smoke. It'll probably involve multiple smokes, or even probably emitting meshes. That's another cool thing that we'll get to soon enough down near the renderer. But I'm going to click on this, and we're going to go, all right, so it's putrid black at the beginning. And man, my particles are just weak. I'm just, what I'm going to do, because I made another texture, I'm just going to switch it, because my texture sucks. What I made for this webinar. I'll just apply it. There we go. All right, so this is, I've just applied the one that I showed at the beginning because it looks a little bit better. So I think the problem that I had is that my alpha for my channel here is too faint. It needs to have a little bit more white in it so it's actually visible, because it's too invisible at this point. Now, to go back to my particle sim, so yours will look, it's not going to change. I didn't just sneakily put in the most amazing particle sim in the world. I've just quickly hacked it. If I just change it back to default again, that's what it looks like. So this is what my particle's emitting at the moment. It's going, pop, 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 pop. It's popping in and it's disappearing like bubbles. So if I click on that, I can change it to be black. And then on the end part, and by the way, I should also explain, so these top little arrows that we see at the top here, that's your alpha, your transparency. And these little arrows down at the bottom is your color. So we can make it like go red if we really wanted to. So it starts black, and it goes red, and it goes white, you know. And if you want to delete one of those things, you accidentally put something there and you're like, damn, I don't want that there, get rid of it. You can click and drag it off. Or just hit delete and it goes away. So just drag it off and it's gone. So in theory, we don't want it to turn white. We want to have some sort of dark gray. There we go. That looks kind of cool. But we can control the alpha. That's the top one right here. And you can also set presets as well here. So if you make some cool sort of gradient, you can kind of load in the preset and add them in here. As you can see, create library. That's what you hit new. So it'll read what I've done, put it in there. But if I go to the top one right here, I'm going to set the alpha to 0. Now, what's actually happened here? It's transparent at the top because I've clicked on the top one. What I wanted to do is to slowly come back in. So I'll make it 100% again. Like that. That's not really working. We can always even additionally add to it and fade it in. So you can put like levels of how it fades in. Maybe black is still here a little bit more. But the benefit of this now is you see, instead of it popping in, like going, it's now slowly coming in. Because you can see the transparent, you can see the fade off right there. And we just want to replicate that towards the end as well. Because as you can see, it's popping like bubbles. It's just vanishing instantly. So just clicking on color over lifetime, change this to like 0. Click here and just change it to 100%, and there we go. Now it's fading off. So we've got black, and then we've got like it fading off into the distance. So that's looking all right. Then we have color by speed. I'm not going to touch this one, but it's pretty self-explanatory. So the faster this is like more examples if you're using some sort of like particle effect that goes really fast, or you're just playing around with particles. You can make the particle change at the speed it's going. So it could be red when it's going at like 1, and then when it's going at 5, it can be turned to purple. Self-explanatory there. Size over lifetime. Well, we do want to change this one. And I'm going to turn it on. I'm going to click on my thing, and I'm just going to leave it on a curve. I'm going to click on that just to make sure this looks good. I'm going to go open up my editor because I like using the editor for this one. So I'll go color size over lifetime, and you can easily just do this. Hit the preset, and it starts really small and then goes in. Or you can make it like starts really like this curve here. That will probably work best for us. So it goes really small, but really fast shoots up, slows down, and then falls off a little bit to 1. So that's not too bad. Do we have there? I might want to just change like the cone influence. I'll just close that down, like the shape. You can shrink that down a bit. You see it's puffing from that same location once again. But hey, we're getting like some interesting smoke that's coming off here. So that's what size over lifetime is. So we can have a random between two curves, and I'll show you what the random between two curves, just for the purposes of showing you because you haven't seen it. So random between two curves allows you to, oops, that's not what I want. You can add, like I want it to be random. Actually, I'll just delete that key. Right click, delete. And you can right click on the keys and you can actually change how they blend a little bit, like the tangents. So now, in a way, with this particle, we're doing a random number between here, like all the way up, which is really cool because it gives us a lot of cool customizability with this. We're already hitting an hour mark. Yeah, so I might leave it like that, that's fine. You can use it if you want. Then you got size by speed, same thing, how fast it's going, does it get smaller, does it get larger? Then we've got rotation over lifetime. Now I do want this one because at the moment my particle, check it out, it's now doing backflips. If I just turn it off, it's just going like this and going across the screen and then off into the distance. We want to give it a bit more random so it doesn't look so repetitive, in other words. So if I turn on rotation over lifetime, you can see now it's going like 45 degrees spin. This is what I meant by the start rotation means pretty much nothing to us because it just starts at what its rotation. If we were to change 45 at the start rotation, like when it was born up here, it'll just spawn on an angle and then kind of just float off that direction, okay? So our rotation over lifetime shows it spinning. So once again, you could leave it like that, that's fine, or you can change it to like a curve. It doesn't really particularly matter, I guess, at this point. Hey, that's cool, that's something new, you can actually preview it. Yeah, I'll just leave it on like constant, so just a random number. It's just spinning. If you deselect it, you probably won't really see it, it's just kind of puffing and spinning around, but you can see it visually. I'll just leave it like that, that's fine. If you want to, you can change it, whatever you want. Maybe I'll change it later, who knows. Then you got rotation by speed, self-explanatory. External forces. Now, this is where it comes in the interesting part. Now, we have to be simulating in world space for this to work in particular. So external forces is if we wanted to use a wind zone. Like I said before, you can have like a wind zone set up. Now, let's just create one. I'm pretty sure it's like game object, 3D object, wind zone right here. There's a wind zone. So this is what a wind zone looks like. They're separate, a little identity right here. You see it's directional and whatnot. I can like rotate it that way or whatnot. And as soon as I say that this particle is then affected by wind zones, by clicking external forces and turn that on, you'll see that the particle changes. See, look at that. It's like clipping. The wind zones are cool. This is how you get those cool spell effects of where you have like things spiraling and hitting each other and sparking off and all that and whatnot. Is that you can click on your wind zone and you can see you can change the main, the turbulence, the pulse magnitude, the pulse frequency. But if you change it to spherical, you get some crazy effect. Like if you just, I believe, if you just play around, I'm just going to give it random values like turbulence and just make it crazy or something like that. Some crazy number. I don't really mind what it is. If I click the particle, you see now the particle's kind of going in and doing like, so it's going in and going like that kind of thing at the moment. It's flipping around. And if you make it really intense, the particles just spiral. They spin around. And of course, the more intensity, like the more a multiplier that you have here, like if I make it like, yeah, there you go. It's like a tunnel spinning around, just ready to explode. So that's what wind zones are. So it's neat because then we don't have to worry about setting up external forces to all be the exact direction. Because what if you wanted to rotate the particle or rotate the object? Oh, disaster. You're now stuck with like a particle system that's blowing this way and then another one blowing the other way or something like that. So yeah. So wind zones are our safety little bubbles that we can use, and it can give us like randomization with the wind zone itself and bounce around and twirl and flip and look beautiful, okay? So, but you have to, just remember, you have to have external forces turned on. I don't think, it probably doesn't matter. If I change simulation space to local, it actually doesn't matter. Okay, there we go. What do I know? All right, so I'm going to turn off external forces because as much as I love wind zones, I don't want to use them for this example. So I've got a little puff and smoke kind of going that way. Now I'm just going to close all these so I can actually see what's going on. You just close them by clicking on the name. Alrighty, where are we? External forces, there we go. Now this one's cool. Collision, this one actually does matter if it's in local or world. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create just a quick cube. I'm going to zero it out in the world. This is why I said work in the center of the world, so you can easily get the thing. All right, this is my cube. It's going to be my roof. Yeah, we'll just give it some random rotation like that. All right, cool. So let's select my particle. So at the moment, this particle is going through the object. It is blowing in that direction. It doesn't look like it's affecting, but it's definitely going through the object. It's syncing with it. Now, I have to be in world space for this to work. We can even show you that it doesn't work through local. So you have world space turned on. You go to collision, turn that on. And it's still not doing anything. And you're like, what? What's going on? Well, then you can change this to world. And look at that. Now it's interacting. Particle's not sinking through. And wherever I move it, it's actually bouncing off the wall, as you can see. It's like hitting it and bouncing backwards. We can visually see it doing that. Now watch this. When I change it to local, oh man, they must have fixed it. What do I know? I'm like, I just remember older versions of Unity that had problems with that when it was not in local space, like simulation space, it just wouldn't work. Man, it just shows you how I've been using Unity since 2.5. So I've just pre-learned all these quirks and problems with the program. But no, it doesn't need to worry. Well, I always like to work in world, okay? That's just about it. Because if we're working in local, remember what happens with local is that the whole thing moves together like a Muppet. It's just like, whoa. If we have it in world, then it's like, it's kind of emitting along where we're moving it, okay? So that's the reason, okay? So that's why it looks good, okay? It's so good. Okay, so we have here collision, and it's self-explanatory to look at these. You got dampen. So how much does it dampen when it hits something? Does it like hit and then slowly slides off? Or does it hit and bounce back? So you got bounciness. So we can make it like 6. So it's now bouncing, but smoke doesn't do that, obviously. But it's now freaking out. It's now a ball pit. And you've got lifetime loss. So you can make it lose its life. How brutal is that? We're already like we're murdering these particles. So we can say that, hey, it loses about like 3 seconds, 1 second of its life. Now we've just murdered our particle simulation. And it's neat because that means we have so much control over this that when a particle hits a wall, we can make it disappear. We don't have to worry about it anymore. Obviously we set that to 0, so it still continues to live on and have multiple particle buddies spawn afterwards. But that's kind of like what we have here at this point. So we can change dampen, and you see dampen once again is when it hits it, it kind of absorbs the impact. But we don't really want dampen turned on. We want it to kind of be like that. We want the bounce to probably be 0.5. So it'll hit the object and then just continue to slide up and slide down. So if this is a big giant smokestack and there's smoke piling in the room, and we have multiple of these particles like all over the place, we could do that, and it looks cool. Yeah, and you have collides with everything. This is pretty cool. So obviously you might not want to collide with everything. So we do have layers here, which you can set up on your objects. Like this cube, for example, is currently in the default layer, for example. Right? So if we add a new layer really quickly on this cube with it selected, and you simply just add a layer as like, this is going to be the webinar layer, right? Pretty sure that should work. Now, if we change it to the webinar layer, like just tick it, go back to our particle sim, and when it has everything, we can untick webinar and watch this. Hey, look, it goes right through it. It ignores that object. So we have ultimate control of particles like we have here. So that stops you just colliding with everything. Like you might have like, I don't know, like menu text or something, and it's hitting the menu text and you're like, stop, damn you particle, stop hitting the menu text or something like that. So that's what that's there for. So we can change what it is and which layers get affected. It's an extremely valuable tool that we have there. All right. And layers are awesome as well, especially for like culling objects or sorting them and whatnot. We're nearly there, guys. We're nearly at the end. Let's just see if there's any questions people have had. I probably haven't really read them. What's this? Is it possible particles? Oh, no, like a powerful river. So Natasha's question is it possible to have particles to follow some kind of path? Yes. Well, you'll generally animate. I would say you could possibly even animate the particle kind of pulsing. There's multiple ways you could do it, but it's involving also an animated texture. So you generally have the material looking as if it's animating, like streams going down, and then you have particles like on the rocks, sort of splashing and stuff. You wouldn't really want to have. You can have it, but it's just a bit performance, like a bit of a waste in a way. You can do it, definitely. It's just that you would want to optimize a particle, and you don't want to have you don't want to have a water stream completely full of particles. That goes back on our first problem of having too many particles. You can use particles for a waterfall of coming down, and then it stops. But you don't want to have particles constantly flowing. But you can do it if you really want to. But it wouldn't be ideal. You'll generally just place your particles in strategic places, such as on a rock, like where it's bubbling and stuff, kind of bubbling in front of you or something like that. Yeah, I'm just seeing there's no other questions. Okay, we'll just keep going on. All right, so awesome. So we're coming down to collision. Sub-emitters. So remember how I was murdering particles like a madman, right? These are my particles bouncing off this wall and stuff like that. Well, we can actually, and this is where Unity just gets crazy. This is where the inception horns start honking off, going, wah. All right, so we have sub-emitters. Sub-emitters is that every time something happens, i.e. birth, collision, or death, it'll spawn another particle simulation. So I'll show you something really cool, just really briefly. If I just go create a new particle simulation, oh crap, where did it go? I'll just zero it out in the world because I have no clue where it's gone. All right, there we go. So this is just a new one that I've just created, just really quickly. Let's go down to sub-emitters and turn it on. And let's say when the particle dies, we'll create another particle. And all it does is parents, or has a child parented to the main particle. So see in my hierarchy, it's just called particle system bracket 1 because I haven't named the original one or whatnot. What it's going to do is it's going to parent another subparticle that then spawns after, like at the position of these particles when they die or they disappear. So if I go to the death particle and I click on the little arrow here, now we're getting like, so when they go up and die, they spawn more particles. And then we can have it technically, this is where it gets inception, right? So then we can go to this physical particle, and once again, it's just like the normal particle editor. You can see it there. The better way to visualize this is if you're using the particle editor, because you can see them sitting next to each other. So we can say when the main particle dies, we spawn another particle. And then when that particle dies, we spawn another particle. But I really don't want to do this just in case the stream dies, but we'll do it anyways. We're going down there. All right, so now when that particle dies, then more particles spawn. And then, oh God, it's just chaos on the screen. All right, so before this happens, I'm going to go to my sub-emitters and I'm just going to delete them. That's playing with fate there. But you can understand, think of like a firework. You'll have it go up, like a particle going, and then another one going, and then that kind of stuff. I love you appreciate my sound effects. That's what happens. All right. So we can also do it with collision, which is another really, really cool feature. So when it hits this object, we can make it spawn something. Look at that. Dude, what has gone? just chaos. Just absolute chaos. Obviously, you'll change the particle and you'll edit it. So a good example is this, is if we're shooting like a particle hits something, we can have like a spark, like a really simple small particle. You wouldn't want to be spawning like a million one of these at this point. Yeah, you'll use the dust. You'll use, the question was, if I wanted to make like dust flying around in the room, would I use a particle system? For Unity, yeah, you'll use you'll just basically, remember how we can emit from a shape? We'll just emit it from like a cube. The cube will be the size of the room, and then we emit from the volume of that cube, and it will just, and you don't give it like direction or not. You just animate it so it just kind of spawns and then rotates, then disappears, then spawns, then rotates, and then disappears. Does that kind of make sense? I hope it did. So basically, you'll just have that in the room, but you won't give any velocity to the particles. They'll just spawn and then fade out, kind of thing. If you wanted complex stuff, you'll probably need to use Unreal or a custom plugin, because Unity, it's pretty basic to what it has. It does have all this ability that you can do all this awesome stuff, but customizability, you'll use something like fog in something like in Unreal, and you'll just like play around with their settings, or you'll use a plugin inside of Unity. But you can do it. I'll just emit from a volume and then have particles kind of rotate and then fade off. And then you could just have it at like, if you wanted to make fog, like you can, if you wanted to, really cheaply with particles, make the particles large and just have them very low to the ground and tumbling and turning, and they interact when you bump into them. The only problem is with that, and is that when the player walks up to the particle, they'll see a giant particle in their face. That's the only problem about that. So they'll have a big giant particle, and when your camera clips through it, you'll see like a scene. So that's when it comes into when you have some sort of custom particle simulation or plugin that allows you to do that. So Unreal, you could do that. When you get close to the particles, they fade off, which is really cool. And I guarantee there'll be some sort of plugin that's out there that you can do it. Because how fog works, or dust, when you get close, it kind of vanishes a little bit. You don't want to have big giant dust particles in front of your face. But yeah, that's what you'll do for that. So I'll just delete the sub-emitter. And you can see like the most amazing stuff for these particle sims. So I'm just going to turn off sub-emitters, but that's Inception. That's like, I have tried once, but they don't allow it anymore. Like when you can get a particle sim and then make it loop and have the same particle sim, because you used to be able to select, I think it was like, I might be incorrect, and I might be just daydreaming or something like that. I'm just making stuff up, but I remember you could get a particle sim and another particle sim, and they kind of spawn on each other. So there just becomes just this massive crash test for your PC. Yeah. Texture sheet animation. So texture sheet animation is what you'll use for like the flames. So you have a sprite sheet, and you can do it pretty easy in Photoshop. If I just Google, if I just go Photoshop, I'm just going to Google this really quick. Photoshop sprite sheet creator. Pretty sure there's this really easy generation script that I remember having. Hey, it's this one. Isn't that great? First try. All right, so we have the sprite sheet generation script. So just like in old classic games, even Unreal does this. If you look at their fire particles and stuff, I even think that even the particle from the Viking village will be using a sprite sheet, I'm pretty certain. So it has the right image of it kind of bending up. But you can do this, this is free. You just I typed in sprite sheet creator Photoshop, and you get this really neat plugin like this. And all you have to do is just make the size of the size of the sprite, and then just pile them all on top of each other, like numbered, of course. And then you hit this script, and then it automatically positions them next to each other, and then it can play through the animation completely. So yeah, I guess you can get information from the screen share right here. But you can do it manually, but it stacks them all on top of each other and spreads them all out, and then you can load it in. So that's what this texture sheet animation is. So if you have an object animating, like doing something, playing an animation, you can put that in there. I don't have one, unfortunately. I know, terrible, but that's what you'll do for that. We can probably look at the Viking village one very briefly as well, and we can see what they've done with that. All right, we're at the bottom. We have made it through the intense force of our particle introduction to the particle editor. As you can see from the smoke, I didn't enable everything because that's one thing you don't want to do, but I enabled stuff that I thought that might be useful. So I've enabled rotation, size over lifetime, color over lifetime, collision, you name it. It just goes on from there. So, yeah, so if we just keep going down in here, we've got render mode. Now this one's actually important. So remember how billboards always look towards the camera? Think of old school games where you look at grass and the grass will always kind of like pan and follow you, or not. That's what billboards are. They're just billboards. Now you got stretch billboards. You'll generally use a stretch billboard for maybe like a spark or particle effect. All it does is just squash and stretch your particle. And I'll just make sure I'm in the shot. Okay, cool. Yeah, so this right here where we've got stretch, you can see it's coming out interesting. It's freaking out. But you can see it's squashed, but it's also being rotated and thrown off that way. But I would use a stretch billboard for a spark. So if I had a sparking effect, like a plug on the wall, like sparking away, I'll have the material that's applied to it would have an emissive property to it. This one doesn't have emissive at all, but it'll be glowing or whatnot, and I'll use the little spark and I'll emit it, shoot out little particles that'll bounce off the ground and stuff like that. That's what I'll use that for. And it always follows the camera wherever I look, but it does look a bit odd sometimes. As you can see from there, from the angle, it's not really rendering properly. So that's a problem. Then we've got horizontal billboard. Now what is horizontal billboard for? Where's it going? Well, it's for like top down basically like RTSs or whatnot. The camera is always going to be viewed from the top, so there's no point viewing the particles kind of from the perspective. We just have them always emitting and facing at the top and emitting upwards, okay? And then we have vertical billboard. Side scroller, come on, you know this. All right, so side scroller, so we're only going to really see them from the side, so there's no chance it's going to flip or anything like that. And then, this is the crazy part. So you can actually emit mesh. So remember how we could emit off mesh? Well, we can actually physically emit mesh. At the moment, it's emitting cubes that have my particle applied to it. Like it's on all four sides of the cube. It's a bit hard to see, but I think if I just grab it and move it, you'll see it a bit better. Look at that. So if you wanted to like destroy your computer or destroy whoever's individual you're making your game for, well, there's one thing you can do. But you can get real nice stylized effects with emitting mesh. Yeah, I wouldn't do anything with the mesh. Like you can, programmers can access the mesh particles themselves. And you can do like calls, like when they touch something, they stick together or whatnot. I did remember making a game with my previous co-workers where we had a game where it was a terrible idea, but we used mesh to basically, that when you bump into stuff, it sticks to it. And then like you have to get 5 or 6 something particles stuck to each other. And then I don't know what I'm trying to explain. It's a very hard game. It was game jam, but basically, it's bad for performance, but for stylized games, it's freaking awesome. Like we can make perfect circular particles that emit outwards. Like think of any sort of cartoony, stylistic game. This is going to actually help you out with the mesh because you got a nice shape. Like as you can see, it's emitting like squares. Obviously, the particle I have applied to it, the material is stupid. It's not going to really work for this. But if I was to just emit cubes, I can't do that if I wanted to. In fact, if we just get our brown and apply it to it, there you go. That makes more sense. How cool is that? Obviously, you won't see the wireframe because we have that turned on. If I just turn it off, that's what it will look like in game. And remember, these are emitting shadows too, so help us all. But hey, that's kind of cool, right? But it's emitting mesh. It can be a bit of a performance kicking the bad parts. I don't know. All right, let's go back to our thing. So that's what that we have here. And you can choose your mesh as well. It doesn't have to be a cube. As you see, you can make it cylinders. See what I mean by stylized? Yeah, it's cool, particles. All right, so yeah, you can do that. And I'm going to change it back to billboard. So billboard's the classic one. It always faces the camera. I'll always be faithful to it, but you have the options to choose the other ones if you want to. And then you have most of these settings I'm just going to a little bit skip over, but you got normal direction, like the direction of the normals of the faces of the object, if that makes any sense. That's like how it's rendered is what it faces. You got the material, and then you've got sorting. So one problem that we have with transparent objects is the sorting of the particles. So we're actually emitting multiple images that have transparency going past each other. We have problems with like deferred and forward rendering. Well, one works better for the other. I've actually, some reason I've forgotten which one works better. But basically, when a particle like crosses, it'll generally cull out the stuff behind it, and it looks all freaky or weird. Or you have that weird illusion that it's rendering the particle always in front of itself. So when it like rotates around, it looks off. Like it looks like you're looking into a black hole. Hard to describe, but if you look up like just any article around on the net, like articles for like alpha sorting and all that kind of stuff like that, that's what this is for. So this is for you to debug and kind of solve those problems if they happen. So if your particle's not displaying properly, generally it's the renderer that you got to be most concerned about. And then of course we can cast shadows. So this is something next generation of consoles brought into the game of awesomeness. All right, so we can cast shadows with our particles, which you couldn't do before. Like if you look at like Xbox 360, or you could if the programmer made something special and they added it to their game. But generally, for access for us individuals, for Unity and Unreal Engine and stuff like that, we couldn't. Well, it was more of a new thing. It's been around for a few years now, but when we look back on like the old consoles, they couldn't really do that. So a particle system will be going and you won't see any shadow of where that particle is. I'm incorrect in the fact that it's just a new thing. It's been around for a while. It's just now it's standard throughout all applications, really. Like if you really want to make a good application that has a good particle system, you will want to have shadows. So casting shadows as well as emitting light, that's another thing. So emitting light from your particles using like your GPU so that your particles can emit physical light beams and glow up the place. Unreal does this like really good. Unity, yeah, it's not so great, but it's still fantastic. Yeah, so that's what that's kind of there for, like cast shadows. So you want to have that on. But you have two-sided or whatnot, so the object's double-sided. That's actually pretty good, the two-sided one. That's because when the particle gets emitted, or a plane, like a 3D mesh, the best way to represent this and understand what two-sided means, like the shadow or the particles, I don't think that actually does work. Where's my shadows? They were working just before. See, some of them, they don't work particularly. And I know I'm sidetracking. Oh, get out of here, mate. Okay, cool. Oh, God. What's going on? All right, best way to describe this. Go away. Mayor. This is the first time I've opened Mayor on this computer. Is if you have a plane, and I'm pretty much nearly at the end of this webinar, by the way, if you've made it this far. The 8 people that was once 50, they've all left. Okay, so in Maya, right, if we render this, hey, look, we can see the plane, and if we render it from this way, because it's rendering, in a way, little planes with the texture on it, like emitting outwards. Now, the reason why it has two-sided is the option that we have there is so it can be viewed from both sides. So if we were to import this into a game engines don't read it kind of like how Maya and 3ds Max have now perceived us, what we can see here. If I turn off the backface culling on this object by going shading and backface culling, you'll see that I can see the texture here, but when I rotate it this way, I see right through the object. And that's technically this is our normal face, our normals of the surface of this object are projecting outwards, so then we can see it from this way, but it only can be viewed from one direction. So and I know I've just probably mounted most of your brains at this point, but that's okay. So I can only see it from this direction, but if I rotate it this way, you see it's invisible. So if you were back in the classic days of when I guess Max and Maya weren't as established and as well known or as used as much, you probably had this understand the concept behind it. But two-sided means it kind of lets us allowed to do this. So then we can see the particle from both sides of the thing if we were to look underneath it. And you'll probably see that if you change it to like horizontal billboard or something, and see how I look up and I can see it or whatnot. And yeah, anyways. Sorting layers, all that kind of stuff, re-simulate wireframe, and then of course finally we have our little particle down the bottom here which we can change. We've actually literally gone through everything that we needed to do for the Unity particle editor. It's a crash course in how to use it. If you stayed around for this long, then awesome. Apologies if I did trail off in little bits, but it's all for the greater good, of course. But when we look at particle systems in Unity and such, really, there's the three main ones you need to worry about, which is how it's spawned, which is what we looked at up the top. Then there's the emission, like we have here, like how does it emit, like what's going on. Then it's the shape, like what is the emit. All the rest of this is optional. And then of course there's the render on how it's actually physically rendered inside of Unity. But looking at all of this and seeing how far we've come, looking through here, you can see how easy it is. And the only way to get better at doing particle sims and stuff like that inside of Unity is just practice. Just opening them up and screwing around with it and stuff like that. And of course, the better way of learning how to do games development is by making games, of course. So the only way to get better at making games, just like the only way to get better at making particles, is not entirely always watching tutorials like this and stuff like that, because that can go in one ear and out the other, is actually getting your feet dirty, hands deep in mud, and attempting this kind of stuff as well. So if you, I guess, enjoyed a little bit of the particle shenanigans that we've had for Unity, showing you how to make a little basic particle here, I would recommend playing around and maybe opening up Unity yourself and just experimenting with different stuff and dissecting what other people do. So there's lots of examples on the asset store within inside of Unity. You can also import more in. If you go assets, import package, and then you select particle systems right here, you'll import Unity's default particle systems that have stuff going on, and you can kind of see how they're all constructed and elaborated and all that kind of stuff. But now if we look at it, if the last thing actually I did, I've been going for an extensive amount of time, but that's okay. If we look at this particle system and we want to reuse this in the level, the last thing that we have to do is make a prefab object. So I'm going to right click in my project and go create folder, and I should call this prefabs. And if we open that up and go right click, create prefab. So prefab is our instancing. It's how we instance and drag in multiple copies so it only loads at once in memory, in other words. And we'll just go call this smoke. And then what I'll do is I'll grab my particle, and it's essential to have this in 0 world, because if it's not in 0 world, when I drag it on top of my prefab, every time I drag my prefab in, it'll be offset. Like the particle will kind of be like, well, here's my my prefab, and then my particle's over here. We want it to be together, okay? So with my particle system, I should also name it. I'll name it smoke. And then all I have to do is I have it center in the world. I can leave the rotation like that, that's fine. I simply just drag it from the hierarchy on top of my smoke prefab that's empty. And you can tell it's empty because it's an empty white box. And there we go. Now our prefab is all working great and dandy. Now when I drag this guy in, you can see I can now use this same smoke effect across my entire project. I can use it in my city level, my forest level, my whatever level, etc. So I just drag them in, and I've got my multiple smoke particles here. And if I was to play the game, because this is where the camera is, I'll just like pull the camera down or something, have a look at it, and hit play. There you go. So you see the smokes now all firing off from all the different ones. You can see there's a few different particles, but ideally you would want it to tailor to what the camera's going on. So maybe if I grab my camera, rotate it, and then just flip it over here and have a look, you'll see a bit more of it piling away. Now remember how it just started? Remember that's the pre-warming stuff. So I'll turn on pre-warming and then hit apply. Oh yeah, I think let's just go. It should be already started. Yeah, there we go. And remember, because I'm in tall view, it switches between the game mode and scene mode. That's what's actually happening here. Cool. I think that's about it. So you can. Oh yeah. Sorry, I always keep saying there's another part. If you right-click on your prefab, I can then, if I wanted to share this with you, or if you wanted to make a particle system and share it with someone else, Unity is really awesome in the fact that we can just grab that element and go, everything to do with that element, send it off into a package and pass it off to someone else. So if I right-click that and go export package, it'll show me everything. And if I have include dependencies turned on, it'll show me everything that has to do with that particle to make it exist, and basically packages it up and then sends it off, in other words. So if I have included dependencies on, it has my texture, my prefab, my material, and if I hit export, I just call it a package, whatever I call it, and save it. And then on your computer, you just simply double click on it, and it will open up this little package window, and it'll be like, do you want to import these files? And then you go, yes, and then they import it in. And that's exactly how I originally imported in my smoke particle from the beginning that I showed at the beginning of the session. See how different they are when you look at them now? Like our one's more black, more dark smoke. This one's more kind of whiffling, but created using the same effects. Sweet. So at this point, I think it's time to go to Q&A, if there's any Q&A and stuff, and the last bits I'll add on here is if you wanted to know more about games development, either or screen or VFX or whatnot, check out these resources or links that we have here. And of course, we run regular awesome webinars from different teachers from different campuses that you'll find on this channel. This webinar will be archived automatically after this recording has been finished as well. So basically you would be able to find it at your leisure, and it's completely free, and you can expect to find more in the future when we fire them off and organize them to be or scheduled, in other words. But we have campuses in Australia and the US currently of this video, and of course we also have the online campus. So if you can't make it to a physical campus, you can study online through Adobe Connect or an e-learning online environment. So at this point, I am going to look at the chat and see, and it doesn't look like there's any questions at this point. Oh, there's heaps of questions. All right. I just got to look at the chat, see what you have to ask, and if there's no questions, I'll probably wrap things up. And thank you very much for attending this lecture webinar, a lengthy webinar on Introduction to the Unity Particle Editor inside of Unity 5. Awesome. So let's have a look. I'm scrolling through the chat. People talk about fireworks. Do you want to make something dust? People are referring to dust. A mix of dust. Rocket League. Cool. I don't think there's any questions. So I'll let you guys go. You have important things to do in your afternoon. Just like myself, I got to get on to preparing for classes. But thank you very much for attending this webinar on the Introduction to Unity Particles, and look forward to seeing you guys next time in a future webinar, or you attending my colleagues working on other cool little webinars that you can find out. Subscribe to the channel for more, and yeah, I'll see you guys later. Take it easy. Thanks for attending. See you guys.